Good morning and welcome to the KDPG Sunday edition. I'm Stacy Smith. The Pennsylvania State Supreme Court issued a ruling this past week that will have a major impact on congressional elections this year. The court, in a 4-3 decision, threw out the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's congressional map, ordering the state legislature to approve a replacement before February the 15th, or the court will adopt its own redistricting plan. On Thursday, Republican lawmakers asked the United States Supreme Court to put a stay on that state Supreme Court order. Now, the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court has a Democratic majority. The Pennsylvania State Legislature has a Republican majority. As John Delano reports, redistricting often brings politics and the Constitution into conflict.
In a very short two-page opinion, the state Supreme Court struck down the current configuration of the state's 18 congressional districts as, quote, clearly, plainly, and palpably in violation of the state Constitution. Democrats and some academic scholars have argued for years that the Republican-drawn districts are an example of extreme partisan line-making. That's because the districts have elected 13 Republicans out of the 18, even though Democrats outnumber Republicans in the Commonwealth.
Districts need to be drawn that are compact and contiguous, and not drawn to benefit one political party over the other. And when they do that, it ultimately undermines our democracy.
Under the court order, the Republican-controlled state legislature has until February 9th to submit new district lines that don't discriminate on the basis of party registration and are compact and contiguous and do not divide counties or municipalities unless necessary to make districts of equal population. Governor Wolf, a Democrat, hailed the decision, saying, quote, I strongly believe that gerrymandering is wrong and consistently have stated that the current maps are unfair to Pennsylvania. But Senate Republican Majority Leader Jake Corman called the court decision a, quote, partisan action showing a distinct lack of respect for the Constitution and the legislative process. The court order could impact this area big time, where 4 of the 5 local congressional districts were drawn to elect Republicans. Attorney General Josh Shapiro hopes state lawmakers can design a nonpartisan map.
I would hope that the legislature would come together, would do this work, and would draw districts that are compact, contiguous, and comport with the rule of law.
John Delano, KDKA TV News.
So why should you care about this battle? Well, it affects your polling place and the candidates you choose to represent you in Congress. Partisan redistricting in America, or gerrymandering, favor one political party over another. Actually, it dates back to Patriot Patrick Henry in the 1789 election. Henry and anti-federalist supporters who controlled the Virginia House of Delegates purposely drew the boundaries of a congressional district to keep James Madison out of the Congress. Well, this morning on the KDPG Sunday edition, maybe we'll go nationwide, the conflicting views on this issue from 2 attorneys who know both the law and politics. Clifford Levine is a co-chair of the public affairs group at the Pittsburgh law firm Cohen and Grigsby and represented Democratic Lieutenant Governor Mike Stack and 3 other high-ranking Democrats in this recent case. He is also active in Democratic politics. Heather Heidelbaugh, a partner with the law firm of Leach Tishman, is a member of the litigation practice group. She is an experienced trial lawyer and former Republican member at large of the Allegheny County Council. Attorney Heidelbaugh is also a frequent political commentator on News Radio 1020 KDKA. David Tribman, the executive editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, is away this week. Jerry Micko, the senior assistant managing editor of the Post-Gazette, joins us for this morning's discussion. I want to thank both of you for coming back to the KDPG Sunday edition. You've been guests in the past, but not necessarily over this particular issue. Cliff, we'll begin with you. Are those congressional districts that bad?
Yes, they are that bad. In fact, all of the experts indicated that there was only one reason to design them in the way they were designed, and that was because of the partisan effect. And it was very interesting at the trial. We had a 1-week trial in front of Judge Brobson, who just, so everybody's talking about politics, he was elected as a Republican judge. Judge Brobson heard the evidence. There were 4 experts from the League of Women Voter Petitioners and 2 experts from the legislative respondents, which we refer to as the Republican Speaker and Senate Leader. And he concluded that there was partisan gerrymandering. These were designed for partisan gerrymandering. Now, he came short of the resolution in terms of what do you do about that. He said, I'm not really sure what the standard is, and he deferred to the Supreme Court. But I think it's really noteworthy that nobody was defending these designs for any traditional purposes, like, for instance, compactness, preserving subdivisions. This was basically partisan gerrymandering effort to create 13 out of 18 districts.
All right. So, Heather, would you agree that your party gerrymandered this whole thing to try to put Republicans in Congress?
The Constitution of the United States states that the state legislatures are to draw the maps. The state legislatures are partisan political bodies. So, of course, they draw the maps, and it is allowed to be partisan because that's what politics is. The question is it, and this is what Brobson said and the Supreme Court said, is it so partisan that it violates the Constitution? And we don't know from the Supreme Court's two-page opinion.
You're talking about the state Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court.
Well, the United States Supreme Court says the state legislatures are to draw the maps.
Okay.
Okay? And of course, a state legislature is a body of partisans, Democrats and Republicans. And every 10 years, whoever is in power in the state legislatures, and every state legislature draws the lines. There is no basis to say because it is drawn to favor a Republican, or many times to favor a Democrat, that in and of itself is unconstitutional. What the question was, which still hasn't been addressed, either by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court or yet the Supreme Court, who's going to be deciding a major gerrymandering case, we believe, is it so partisan that it becomes unconstitutional?
Well, I want to respond to that because there's a really interesting question. The 4 conservative justices on the Supreme Court, including Justice Scalia when he was alive, basically threw up their hands and they said, these can get very, very partisan, really partisan. We don't know if it should be even reviewable by a court. Maybe we just don't even look at this area. And Justice Kennedy was the 5th vote, and he said, you know, I'm not quite there yet. There might be a basis to challenge these. And one of the sort of unfortunate situations that have arisen out of these cases is that a number of cases say you can't have it. Partisan gerrymandering is a bad thing. They look at a particular map and they say, well, this isn't quite there. This map is there. There was no other justification. You could you couldn't do any more effective job than the Republicans did here. So the question is, if there is going to be a judicial review, and by the way, the Constitution doesn't just talk about designing maps. The Pennsylvania Constitution talks about freedom of expression and equal protection.
And that's a key point here, because their case is based on the Pennsylvania Constitution.
Yes.
Which is different than the U.S. Constitution.
Well, that's the reason you were able to get the court to side on this one, because you narrowed it down to a state case. Is that right?
Well, a state case, and so we all are waiting now because the Supreme Court now, the United States Supreme Court, has an application for stay from the Republican leaders, who are basically making the argument that even though it's under the state constitution, you're basically not giving us enough time here to come up with a map.
I want to get into that area in just a moment. If we could put that map back up, because Heather, I want to ask you this. We're talking about just locally here. You can see the 18th congressional district, if you can see it, and you pretty well know
I'm in
which
the
one
18th.
that is. You're in the 18th, all right. That's kind of an odd-looking district, wouldn't you agree?
Well, but yeah, and everybody talks about the goofy district and goofy kicking whoever
Right.
district. They're all on, but that really doesn't matter. Okay, what matters is applying the constitutional principles. And so, because it's a district that's existed like that for quite a while, it represents whole communities. And remember, there's a Supreme Court requirement that the same number of people be in each congressional district. It's hard to draw these districts. You
Right
can't
now
just
it's at 71,000
draw-
or around that area. Is that
You
right?
can't just draw a grid.
You just can't do that. Can you?
No, I agree with Heather that it's a little different. In the state legislative races, the United States Supreme Court allowed for more population deviation, maybe up to like 12% or so. But I agree with Heather that for the congressional districts, they want it exact, so you can be off by like 1 or 2 people, literally. So sometimes you have to go into a street. However, having said that, you can still design these, and there were many maps that were introduced into evidence that showed how you could design these and have equal population and respect political subdivisions.
The CEO of the Pittsburgh Foundation, Maxwell King, I'm quoting here from an article, says that he felt compelled to act out of, quote, concern about the strength of the civic fabric, more and more voters feel as if they don't matter, that they don't have a role. I can't think of anything more threatening to the civic strength of the community than that. That's, again, CEO Maxwell King of the Pittsburgh Foundation, which maybe up until this point was nonpartisan.
He actually filed a friend of the court brief.
He filed a friend of the court brief. Is it that that you feel that voters feel as if they don't matter?
Well, let me give you an example. In 2012, the first year that this map was in effect, that was the year Barack Obama beat Romney. And in that particular 2012, if you added up all of the votes and statewide for Democratic congressmen versus Republican congressional candidates, more people voted for Democrats in the whole state, and yet we ended up with 5 Democrats and 13 Republicans. So when people say that, oh, voters like to split the vote, they like to have a Democratic president and a Republican Congress, not necessarily. The design of this map produced that result. More people voted for Democratic congressmen and ended up with 5 out of 18.
So these maps are designed every 10 years, and they're designed by people who are elected by the people. The House is held by the Republicans, the House of Representatives. So in 10 years, at the end of, so it was designed in 2011, so 2020, it'll be redesigned. But that wasn't good enough. We had to file a case in June, and now we have a decision. This case has had a history of less than 6 months. And we're going to have new maps, and voters aren't going to know who to vote for. People who are running for office, as I have run, are not going to know who their constituents are. Is the person who's going to run for Congress, are they going to know what the issues are in the map that's going to be designed here? You have the court. It's an extraordinary statement of a lack of judicial restraint. And even Max Baer, who is on the court, said, in his opinion, in his dissenting opinion, that what this has done, because of the short time frame, is potentially throw this May election into chaos. He used the word chaos. You're going to have the maps redrawn. You're going to have people running in districts that they don't know. Voters are going to have to vote for people who they don't know who's running. And then you're going to have the Department of State is going to have to change all of the paperwork to conform with this election. What was the rush? The elected representatives of Pennsylvania drew this map in 2011. They could have had another crack at it in 2020.
Actually, Justice Wecht, in response to a similar argument, said, what was the rush with Brown versus Board of Education? Why couldn't we keep the separate but equal schools for another 2 years? If the map is truly unconstitutional, why should Pennsylvania voters, particularly petitioners whose voices are not heard because of this systematic discrimination and tilting the table, why should we go another 2 years when it's so important to have an opportunity to
participate? That's a false argument, because Brown versus Board of Education was a U.S. constitutional argument. This is a unique argument. This is based on the Pennsylvania Constitution of some theories that have never been even decided in redistricting cases. You know, redistricting really started in Baker versus Carr, which is in the 60s. So we have some Supreme Court precedent about where we should be on redistricting. But first of all, this opinion gives us no guidance. It's 2 pages, and it says this will be done. And if it isn't done, the court is going to step in and do it.
No, it specifically says the traditional criteria, which were discussed at the trial extensively, basically equal population, compactness, contiguity, and respect for political.
But to Heather's point here, were you even surprised that the court came down with it to do it so fast?
No. They, to understand the history, it was filed in Commonwealth Court, and then the Commonwealth Court was going rather slowly.
Well, I'm not talking about the quickness of their decision.
No, I'm just saying the Supreme Court took this case in November and ordered the parties to proceed quickly. So you felt that they understood that if there was a finding of unconstitutionality, they wanted to proceed.
The entire elective system in Pennsylvania, the 6th largest state in the United States, has been upended in 6 months.
Can I just say something, though? Do you know the Republican legislatures that designed this map got this through in 7 days
and
in the General Assembly?
36 Democrats voted for this.
But the point is, they did this in 7 days. They had a shell bill. They came in. They put it in committee. It was moved out of committee.
And there we actually.
Well, there were some from Philadelphia who voted for it. Right, Senate none. It's unconstitutional map. It's not just about. This is not just about legislators. That was what the Attorney General Shapiro was saying. This is not just about legislators picking for themselves. The voters should get back to picking legislators.
All right, hold your thought. We have to take a break. We're way over. We'll continue our discussion in just a moment.